everyone. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Talitha cum. Little girl, get up. For a lot of my 20s, I served as a program director at a Christian summer camp in Ontario. The program was called Leaders in Training, LIT. And the point of it was to prepare and equip teens to become camp counselors at the other sites of the camp. It was an intense program. It started with a 4-day canoe trip and then launched directly into an aggressive agenda that went from 7:15 in the morning until 10:30 at night. These kids got Bible studies, wide games, community prayer. They did service projects and ran program and learned about the shape of the Bible and their role in faithfully improvising in the time between the end of the epistles and when Jesus came back in all of his glory. Did I mention it was an evangelical summer camp? It was. And there's lots to be said about that kind of spiritual formation in conversation with many other kinds of spiritual formation. Because some things they got very wrong, but some things they got right. One of the things that they got right was camp names and the naming ceremony. Camp names, for those of you who don't know, are names you just have at camp. Rooted at least in part in Jesus' habit of renaming his disciples, Simon becoming Peter, James and John becoming sons of thunder, the way it worked at this camp was that you were supposed to come by your camp name at LIT. Something that you did or something that you said, something that you fell off of or into was supposed to lead to the name that would walk with you for all your time at camp. One girl who had a lot of accidents had the camp name of Olive because she'd regularly respond, Olive, to whatever injury befell her. Sam, who's here tonight, his camp name was Cabra. You'll have to ask him why after the service, because it's been a decade and I don't remember. Yeah. My friend Jenny's camp name was Zing because she was amazing. And we took this stuff very seriously. Her mom became Mama Zing to an entire generation of camp staff. She was just living her life. Camp names were a big deal. They were bestowed on the last day of LIT in a special ceremony. We talked about how God changed someone's name because they were calling them to live into a new part of who they were and to stand up into a deeper kind of belonging or a new kind of mission. We talked about how LITs were going through a transformative experience, shifting from campers to staff, and how they were standing up into a new identity. We told them about Talitha cum. Little girl, get up. For Jairus and his family and his daughter, the stakes were higher than a camp name. The stakes were life and death, which can be how things feel when you're 16, but it isn't always how things are. For Jairus' daughter, though, that is how they were, life or death. She was so sick, her dad, a leader in the synagogue, was taking a faithful chance on the authority of a powerful teacher operating outside of the rules to save the life of his daughter. His faith worked, or at least his faith had something to do with Jesus' ability to work. Our reading today skipped a few verses, and that is because they are sandwiched between the first and second half of our story, is the story of the bleeding woman, bled for 12 years, whose faith is such that she believes that if she can just touch the hem of Jesus' robe, she will be made whole. And she does. And she is. The very next thing that happens in the Gospel of Mark is that Jesus goes to his hometown, and the townspeople's lack of faith means that he can do no deeds of power there, except a bit of healing. So it does seem like somehow faith does matter here. Faith and transformation. Faith and belonging. Faith and identity. When Jairus fears his daughter has died, Jesus tells him, only believe. And then withstands the laugh of the crowd of mourners, makes his way to the girl, takes her hand, and raises her from the dead. It is Jesus' hand and Jesus' words. And it is Jairus' faith, we're told, that bring about this miracle. As the father of the family, Jairus would have had authority to speak for the faith of his household. His faith was their faith, and the gospel writer would have us believe this. Faith is part of the transformation that Jesus works when he says, little girl, get up, and she does. The transformation from death to life. It's a transformation from isolation to belonging. Now that might sound trite or like a misrepresentation of the stakes, but it matters. When this little girl died, she became a source of ritual uncleanness for anyone who touched her. When Jesus touches her, that act would normally make him unclean for 7 days. And yet, in the transformation, in the getting up, the little girl is brought back to life and brought back to belonging within her community. The mourners who moments ago laughed at Jesus could once again hug her and take her by the hand. It's a moment of faith and identity. At 12, the little girl would be on the cusp of her own identity, the cusp of adulthood. And we can talk more at another time about what it means that this culture's understanding of identity meant she'd be married at 12. But in the context of the story, dying before marriage meant a life lived before its prime, a life without a chance to become the fullness of who one was to be. Faith changes that. Faith transforms, faith brings belonging, faith gives us a shot at becoming who we're meant to be. At camp, our naming ceremony came right before the LITs headed to their sites. They were in a liminal moment, at a threshold of transformation, belonging, and identity. And we invited them to get up into their new names, to get up into belonging at their sites, and to get up into their transformation into leaders. We said their names. We clapped. We believed in a version of them we had not yet seen. That's what faith is, right? Believing in a thing you have not yet seen. Jairus believed a rabbi could heal his daughter. Jesus did all that and more. I and my fellow camp staff believed LITs like Sam could care for kids for 2 weeks before they had done it. He's done all that and more. I'm really talking about how great you are. He's training to be a lawyer. He's going to dismantle unjust systems and care for people pushed to the margins. This man will build a more just world. I couldn't have imagined that when we called him Cabra and sent him to boys' camp. That we both would become who we are a decade later. Jairus could not imagine his daughter resurrected, but he had faith. And Jesus took her hand and spoke, and it was so. When we believe, when we stand up into faith, into transformation, belonging, and into our identities, we cannot predict what will happen. Our imaginations can only give us so much. We can only go so far. In the moments when we're called to only believe, it can feel impossible to hold faith, to imagine what could come next. Communities help. People who come around you and hold faith with you help. Stories help, like the ones we've heard tonight. If you're here and you want it, at Old South Church, we have access to a great cloud of witnesses, of saints and sinners with stories who will help you to hold your faith along the way. They have stories of loss and persistence, of resourcefulness and resilience, stories of a faith so strong and a God so loving. A camper grew into a lawyer. A father turned from weeping to rejoicing, and a little girl got up into a new life. Amen.